To learn is to seek the light, clarity. Now, what happens, unfortunately, is there is some noise coming all the time. I think somebody's trying to call me or what, I don't know. I wish this disturbance could go. Anyway, I'm going to talk irrespective of this distraction. So, when a question which involves many other questions is answered, sometimes the exact meaning I have in my mind may not become clear. This you have to accept as a kind of caveat, so that when an answer is given within a very limited span of time, you take off from there and continue your search. See, when in an interactive session a question is answered, not everything can be said. Now, when we go into today's unit, you will realize how much more remains to be said on this question. So let's now get started. And Harikirtan, before you came, I was saying that today's session will be devoted to the question that you raised. Now, since you are interested in literature and you want to be a writer, let me start with an image from the Bible, an image that is very familiar. We find Adam and Eve hiding themselves from the presence of God. Okay? It is too familiar to need any textual explanation. Now, the most important thing here is hiding. As soon as alienation comes in, human beings devise hiding as a strategy to protect themselves. Fear is activated. Fear is a defensive mechanism. So what do? The only strategy that comes to mind at that time is hiding. So they hide. But the thing is this, in the process, if I don't make my meaning clear, please stop me and ask for explanations, right? Because even if it takes time, it's important that these basics are understood. They're never addressed in our community. Okay. So what happens at this point in the evolution of humanity is that hiding becomes a habit. Hiding becomes a habit. Now, each one of us, including myself, we are all hiding in some respect or the other. It's very difficult to eradicate the inclination or the instinct to hide from human nature. And it is for this reason that God has to come seeking after us. You remember after Adam and Eve alienate themselves from God, God comes looking for them. The first question in the Bible is, Adam, where are you? It's a seeking question, isn't it? The second question in the Bible is, it is in the 4th chapter, verse 9. Where is your brother? God asks Cain, where is your brother? Again, a seeking question. Okay. So all through biblical history, you find God seeking human beings. Why does the need for seeking arise? It arises because hiding has become second nature to human beings. Now, this particular observation can lend itself to a host of investigations, reflections, analysis on your part. But let me not spend too much time on this. So now what I have said is that hiding can become a habit, or it can become second nature to us. If that much is clear, we go to the next step. Now, once hiding becomes our habit, either we can use the garden to hide from God, or we can use God to hide ourselves from the garden. Is that clear? Two possibilities now. Okay, you have God, you have garden. Okay, either we can use the garden to hide ourselves from God. Okay, but we can also do the other thing. We can use God as a hiding place and hide from the garden. Now, if you remember the second chapter of the book of Genesis, verse 15, God took Adam, placed him in the garden and said, "You shall till the land and take care of the garden." Okay, so God places human beings in a relationship of responsibility concerning the garden. Now, garden, of course, is symbolic of all that God has created. See, scriptures use symbols because symbols can convey a lot without using too many words. So either we can use the garden to hide from God, or we can use God to hide from the garden. Is that clear? Now, why is the temptation to hide in God so irresistible? Because then you have no responsibility. God placed human beings in a state of responsibility vis-a-vis the garden. If you want to escape all those responsibilities, the simple thing you can do is to hide in God. That's called piety. This is what is called disembodied or disincarnate piety. You understand? Disincarnate piety. Okay? So this temptation to think of the world in a particular way so as to rationalize or justify the abdication of responsibility for the world can be put in so many ways, very persuasive ways. Okay? It can be given a look of piety. Okay? If I am a child of God, I have nothing to do with the world. I should not come into contact with the world. In which case, Jesus Christ was extremely wrong, because his word become flesh. Okay? So that's the first point I wanted to make. So this particular situation raises at least two key issues in spirituality. Not only two, but at least two. First of all, what is God's relationship to the world? Say, John chapter 3, verse 16 says, God so loved the world. It doesn't say that God hated the world. It doesn't say that God found the world to be a seat of evil and wickedness, and therefore God avoided the world. There's no such teaching anywhere in the Bible. Okay? So, God loves the world. To love is to stay engaged, isn't it? If you love something, do you turn your face away from it? Or do you stay engaged with it? Now, I said a short while ago that human beings can use God as a hiding place, but it's not only God that we use as a hiding place. Now, this is extremely important, what I'm going to say. Please make a note of this. We can hide either in God or in money. So mammon. That's why Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon. In the 19th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Why? Because wealth brings in its wake the temptation to hide in mammon. Mammon becomes our refuge. We may take the name of God, but not, for any practical purpose. You remember the 16th chapter of Luke's Gospel? Rich man and Lazarus. What happened to the rich man? His lifestyle is described there very beautifully. He was clothed in rich raiment and he hid himself. There was no connection, there was no relationship, there was no response between him and Lazarus at this gate. Lazarus is symbolic. Lazarus is not just a human being alone. Lazarus is a symbol of a world in need. Lazarus is symbolic of a world in need. What happens to a rich man? He's shut up in the abundance of his affluence, and for him the rest of the world doesn't exist. Or think of the rich fool in the 12th chapter of Luke's Gospel. A man's land brings forth plenty. He gathers up everything and he says, eat, drink, and be merry. Okay? He's forgotten the whole world. And he has forgotten God also. Okay? Now he is left only with himself and his granaries full of grain. And Jesus says that night his soul was taken from him. So the temptation to hide ourselves in wealth, in mammon, is very real. Okay, and there is a great deal more to be said about it, but let me move on. So the first question is, how does God relate to the world? The second question is, how should we relate to the world? If we abide in God, then we are bound to imitate God, okay? Or to derive from God our wisdom. Now, Jesus says that we are called to be sent out. Mark chapter 3, verse 16. He called his disciples to himself in order that he may send them out. And in one of the previous sessions, I dealt with it. I'm not going to repeat myself. Jesus calls only to send us out. We think that Jesus is calling us to constitute an elite club. We can all sit together, feel nice and goody about each other. That's it. The world doesn't exist. Why? Because the world is full of evil, full of corruption, right? What about our own midst? Any different? I'm seriously confused which is better, the world or the Christian community today. And this has come about because of our attitude. All right, so the point I want to make now is that even isolating ourselves from the world is a mode of relating to the world. How? It is a mode of relating to the world which excludes responsibility. It is not that we cut off from the world. It is that we are not willing to accept the responsibilities of relating to the world. We are happy to derive all advantages from the world, right? I'll come to that a little later. I have much more to say on it. We readily and gladly welcome, we actually grab all the advantages that the world has to offer. But when it comes to being responsible for the world, we say, no, we should not have anything to do with the world because the world is full of evil. Okay? Now, my friend Suresh captained a ship. Is that ship not part of the world, Suresh? After all, it's the army, the navy, right? It is not the Salvation Army. It was the Indian Navy. I worked as a teacher. My salary came from the government. I walk on the road. It's not created by the Christian community. I speak a language which is not invented by the Christian community. I belong to a culture which is not created by the Christian community. There's no way I can cut off from the world. The only way I can cut off from the world is by committing suicide. There's no other way. If anyone says that I have nothing to do with the world, there is no truth in him. Okay, more of that later. Now, I said, even denying the world is a way of relating to the world, but now my next argument. There are two ways of relating to the world. Either we may relate to the world passively or actively. Let me use a less charitable word. Either we may relate to the world as parasites, or we may relate to the world as missionaries. Well, if missionary is a difficult and forbidding word, as children of God, or even ordinary, responsible, normal human beings. You think only Christians are responsible people? So there are only, for universally, whether you're a Christian, Hindu, or an atheist, or any religion, or no religion, there are only two ways of relating to the world. Either passively, what is called passive acquiescence. I don't know if that word is familiar to you. Acquiescence. Georges. Passively acquiesce. Yes, that's fine. Now, why? If you assume responsibility for the world, then you have to address certain issues. That's the point, right? How do we relate to the Christian community? Again, very passively. Let it be, let it be. There are so many problems. Let it be. Don't interfere, right? Then why do I relate to the church? To get whatever benefit I can derive from it. That's the only attitude, right? If anyone says, no, we must clean up the place, that's such a dangerous thing, no? Because we have made it a virtue to relate parasitically to the world, to the church, to our place of work. People try to get away doing the least amount of work. Am I right? Not everyone, of course, there are exceptions, but by and large, I mean, I've been in the workaday world for 45 years, so I know, right? People, if given the chance, would do nothing but draw their salary, and if you can send their salaries home, they'll be very grateful. I'm talking about the academic world. I don't know much about your world. You're in the private sector, of course, it may be different. But the fact of the matter is that it is part of human nature to try and get away with the least, doing the least. So passively. One aspect of relating passively, particularly to the church, is by saying, let's not rock the boat, right? Let's not rock the boat, right? Is that a good thing? Yeah, by our wisdom, that's the best thing we can do. If you don't rock the boat, you're a good Christian, right? But what happens to the boat? The boat has never sailed. So I'm glad that Pastor Suresh is looking after a congregation, it will sail, right? So if someone tries to rock your boat, please thank him. Okay? All right. Now, therefore, if you look at the teachings of Jesus Christ and his public ministry, you will find that it is not this kind of parasitical, passive life that he recommends, but an active engagement with the world. In fact, Jesus realized, and he wants us to realize, that it is not peace, but rupture that will do us a lot of spiritual good. Because this kind of passive peace has corrupted our souls. has taken away our vitality, has emptied our faith life of all substance. So we need a rupture. Now, I hope if you have the patience, I want to talk about a novel. See, I've learned a lot of theology from literature. And in fact, this is something that I suggest to all of you, particularly to Anne, because of the vocation she has chosen for us. Are you all right with my spending a little time? Even if you have not read the novel, it doesn't matter. But I think it will do us some good. It will help me to explain things a little better. The novel I have in mind is a classic, perhaps the greatest novel, or the second, there's some difference of opinion, the second greatest novel ever written, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. It's a story of a university dropout called Rodyo Romanovich Raskolnikov. Don't worry about the full name. You can just remember him as Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov. Now, he was a nihilist, and sort of bloated by his academic standing and his sense of superiority to the rest of the society. He comes to a conclusion that he is not bound by normal moral laws. So, in a kind of peculiar mindset, he decides to kill a pawnbroker. I think her name is Alyona Ivanovna, if I remember rightly, Alyona. Now, he thinks of her as a social pestilence because she extorts money from poor people. See, when they are poor and they don't have money, they take their gold to her. She will give the money and they will never be able to redeem it. And therefore, gold accumulates with her and she has become rich. She has a sister by the name Lisaveta. So Raskolnikov goes to kill her, but after he kills her, he turns back and finds that her sister was an eyewitness, so he kills her also. Now, the point is this. Here, Dostoevsky introduces a rupture. That's what I wanted to point out. The novelist introduces a rupture into the life of the university dropout. Right? Now what happens? Suddenly, he begins to realize that the world of reality was very different from what he had taken it to be. Two things happen, and these are particularly important for our subject. That's the reason why I'm spending a little time on this. The novelist develops the predicament of Raskolnikov, now a criminal, a murderer, at two levels. One is a social level. That is, the moment he commits this crime, he feels himself completely cut off from the society. He cannot relate to anyone. Not only that, he thinks of the world with fear. He thinks of the society with fear. Total alienation sets in. But that is not the most important problem. And that's where Dostoevsky's profundity lies. The greatest problem that Raskolnikov experiences for the first time in his life is that something is happening within himself. He's alienated from himself. He feels that he is getting unhinged. His personal stability is at stake. His sanity is at stake. So, even when he is dodging the arm of law, he remains tormented. And it's incredible how Dostoevsky depicts the state of mind. I have not read a novel comparable to Crime and Punishment. The kind of psychological depth and intensity with which the predicament of a criminal is studied. by one who is not a psychologist. That's an interesting thing. So now, then Dostoevsky introduces two characters. One is a police officer. His name is Porfiry. Very shrewd, very sharp man. He doesn't do anything. He just allows Raskolnikov to disintegrate. He doesn't chase him. He doesn't do anything. He knows that when the time comes, certain things will happen. I'll come to that a little later. So there is a police officer. But there is, and that's the most amazing thing in this novel, there is a prostitute, a young prostitute by name Sonia Mamelodev. Now, she belongs to a very poor family. Her father is a drunkard. Her mother is a TB patient, terminally ill. She has little siblings. Her house is in poverty, and she's forced into the street. The only person to whom Raskolnikov can relate, the only person, is Sonia. And Sonia ministers to him. And one of the most moving scenes I have ever come across in world literature is a scene in which Raskolnikov, disintegrating under the burden of guilt and wanting to be rid of it and wanting to make a new beginning, goes to visit Sonia and asks her a question. He says, is there in the gospel an episode in which Jesus raises the dead man to life, new life, Lazarus? She says, yes, yes, yes. Then he says, can you read that to me? Can you read that passage to me? See, Sonia has a Bible, and that Bible was given to her by Lisaveta, whom this man had killed. Anyway, they sit together and read. Sonia is living in a dingy room, poorly lit, and Dostoevsky depicts in detail the progress in reading this text, the 11th chapter of John's Gospel, and all the time he focuses on the face of Raskolnikov. Anyway, by the time that episode is read and finished, Raskolnikov undergoes a tremendous change within himself. And he takes a decision. He says, I will go and confess my guilt. But this is how I think Dostoevsky describes that scene. You see, the two are sitting together and reading the gospel. He says the dying wick poorly illuminated that poverty-stricken room in which a murderer and a prostitute sat together reading the book of life. When I first read that sentence, I started crying. I couldn't hold back my tears. So what happens is, through this process of inward cleansing, Raskolnikov is enabled to make a new beginning. And he gets then reintegrated into the society. Of course, he undergoes punishment. He's sent to Siberia. Sonia goes with him, and etc., etc. Very, very moving. I don't want to go further into those details. So what I'm saying is, it is impossible for us to be separated from the society. See, very often we are not aware of the social dimension, but that doesn't mean that the social dimension is absent. For example, none of us would want to be in a prison. Why not in a prison? In the prison, you get food, you have a shelter over your head, you don't have the worries of the world. The pain of imprisonment is that the society is cut off. And the individual identity suffers serious trauma when it is cut off from society. So this is something I would like to emphasize. The idea that we can be completely cut off from the world, we need to have nothing to do with the world, etc., is absolute dishonesty. Such a life has never existed on earth, except, of course, in states of extreme madness. It is impossible to lead a normal life as cut off from the world. Now, let me also look at it from another angle. You can actually develop the delusion that you can deny this world and live isolated from the world, provided you live in complete passivity. The moment you become dynamic, the world comes into the picture. For example, in olden days, when I was a little boy in Mavelikara and I used to go to school, once in a while I had the luxury of traveling by a bullock cart. As I came back from school, a bullock cart would be going empty, and I would ask the driver, "Can I get on?" Sometimes he would say, "Yes, yes, yes." See, if you're traveling by a bullock cart, you can actually respond to the world around. Suppose you're traveling by train, what happens? Your relationship with the world is reduced, considerably reduced. Suppose you're flying, it is brought down to zero. It doesn't mean that the world doesn't exist, because after all, you're not going to live in the airplane. You have to land. You have to resume your life. So if we get into this illusion that the world doesn't matter to us, the world doesn't exist, or we should have nothing to do with the world, it only means that our life is empty. We are passive. And as Jesus says, there is no fruit in us. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me, you produce much fruit, right? Is it possible for a wine tree to produce fruit without the world? You suspend a wine plant, have nothing to do with the soil. Say, produce fruit, produce fruit. It's impossible. So the same thing applies to us. I mean, nowhere in the Bible, particularly nowhere in the New Testament, is there any teaching whatsoever to justify, to warrant this idea of living separated from the world. So the question arises, how did this come? Who created it? We'll come to that later. Now, remember, in the previous course, I said a lot about the incarnation. Many of you have attended this, so I will not repeat what I said. But simply, let me remind you that it is impossible for the incarnate Jesus to be separated from the world. He never wanted to be separated. On the other hand, it was the religious establishment that wanted to be separated from the world. You don't find Jesus confined to the four walls of the temple. You don't even find him confined to the premises of the temple. Where do you find him? You find him out on the street. You find him on the seashore. You find him teaching by the hillside. You find him inside people's homes. You find him going into Samaria to minister to somebody, to Jericho, places that are good Jews avoided. You find him with publicans, with sinners, with prostitutes, with the demoniacs. So by our standards of separation, Jesus must have been the most wicked man history has ever seen. So it really leaves me puzzled, my friends, as to how this doctrine of separation, as it has come to be understood, has crept into the Christian community. So if you want, I can give some perspective on how this doctrine emerged, but right now I'm not going to go into it. So the third issue I want to raise is this. So I said this question of being separated from the world raises several questions. First, I said, how does God relate to the world? Second, How does Jesus relates to the world? Third is, it also involves our idea of the self. Now, we have done a session on our idea of self, so I'm not going to repeat any of those. But here, for the time being, let me only say this. Most of us think that we are like a soul closed up in a sack of skin. We have nothing to do with the world. But you ask any doctor, does the skin separate or connect? The human skin is a point of connectivity, not separation. We are connected to the world through our skin. Not only that, how do we breathe? Breathing is continuous, unstoppable, dynamic interaction with the world. Life itself depends on it. So, if you're cut off from sunlight, what happens? Most of us have that problem. We suffer from what is called vitamin D insufficiency, right? Our skin is drawing a lot of vitamin from sunlight. Okay. Where do we go for exercise? Inside the church or outside? Where do we do our farming, gardening? Inside the church? Where do we go for our shopping? Banking? Where do our children study? Only in Sunday schools? I mean, this is ridiculous. How we can entertain such notions. Anyway, therefore, my friends, now let me state it very emphatically. We belong as much to the society as to ourselves. Okay? We belong as much to the society as to ourselves. We can live as though society has no claim on us. But that is to live a life of falsehood, irresponsibility, parasitism. Now, what did Jesus say about us? Jesus said, you're like a grain of wheat, right? So the issue is not whether or not we should relate to the world. The issue is who we are. If we are chaff, we should not relate to the world. Because suppose you sow chaff, what happens? It will perish. If you keep the chaff in a polythene bag, it will remain for maybe 50 years. Suppose you sow chaff, what happens? It will die in 2 days. So if you are not a grain of wheat, but only chaff, what should you do? You should live separate. You should have nothing to do with the world because you cannot survive. For example, these days there's a lot of talk about love jihad, right? We feel that our girls are in great danger. The moment they come into contact with a young man or young men of another faith, they all perish, right? But we never ask the question, why is it that we have become so brittle? Why is it that we have become chaff and not grain? Okay, nobody wants to address that issue because it will take some doing. The other option, of course, is very easy. All you have to do is to stand and beat your breast. So therefore, my friends, we have to have the right kind of relationship to the society around. Now, in psychology, there is something called psychosis. There are two concepts. One is schizophrenia, the other is psychosis. Schizophrenia is your inability to adjust yourself. For example, you become split personality. That's a state of schizophrenia. Psychosis is your inability to adjust to the society. So it is a state of illness, and that was a state of illness that Raskolnikov was suffering from. That's why I introduced that novelty. You can easily download this novel. It's a slightly thicker novel. It's about, I think, 600 or 700 pages. So the social ill adjustment makes us sick. If we want to be wholesome and dynamic, we need to relate to the world. But of course, we should not relate to the world on the terms of the world. We should not be like the world. Okay? Or to put it as beautifully as Soren Kierkegaard does, he says, an understanding of the world should not become an understanding with the world. That's typical Kierkegaard. Can you note down? An understanding of the world should not become an understanding with the world. You understand? Now, we have no problem in staying in a state of understanding with the world, because you see, whenever I've been in public life, I can tell you the number of times I had to take our religious leaders to various politicians to sort out our problems. So at that time, it is not to God that we go, it is to the world that we go. Okay? But the same person on a Sunday morning will get into a pulpit and say, have nothing to do with the world. Okay? It is this hypocrisy that we need to recognize. It doesn't help one bit. The world was made by God. You can't deny this world. Why should you? What did Jesus say we should pray? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done upon the earth as it is in heaven, right? Okay, so look at it in any which way you want. The conclusion is inevitable. We have to have a dynamic, purposive, godly relationship with the world. Now, this kind of relationship with the world has two dimensions. One is what I have talked about so far, which is a social dimension, but there must be a spiritual dimension. And that's what I want to emphasize now. Now, let me go back to the image that Jesus used, that of the vine and the branches. Okay? The branches relate to each other through the vine, right? That's a social relationship. As Paul Tillich, as I think it's Paul Tillich who said, the theology of mediation. He says, if you're a Christian, if you're a child of God, you cannot relate to anyone directly. You will always relate through God. God becomes the intermediary between you and the other person. Okay? God becomes the link language, if you like. Okay? So, in the social dimension itself, a true Christian practices the discipline of keeping Jesus as the mediator or the bridge or the link language, if you like, between oneself and others. So it is not lack of relationship, but positive Christ-mediated relationship that characterizes a child of God. Okay? Is that clear? If anything is unclear, please let me know, because otherwise there is no point. I'll repeat, because it's so important. It is not cutting ourselves off from the social life or social dimension that is spiritual. Rather, it is relating to all, but through Christ as the mediator. And I'm just merely quoting, paraphrasing what Paul Tillich wrote. Now, for this to happen, the vine tree must have roots, right? Roots. Where are roots? Roots are hidden. We don't see the roots. Okay? That is our secret life with God. What the earth is to the vine plant, God is to us. That's why Paul, quoting a philosopher from the Greek tradition, says, and it is, I think it's the 17th chapter of Acts of the Apostles, God in whom we live and move and have our being. God is our earth, as it were. He is the very ground of our existence. This again an expression by Paul Tillich. He said, God is the, these are the exact words, God is the absolute ground of our existence. God is the absolute ground of our existence, just as the earth is the absolute ground of the vine plant's existence. Okay, so in that image, a very profound meaning is conveyed. There is a two-dimensional relationship. One is a social dimension, the other is a hidden spiritual dimension, but that hidden spiritual dimension influences the social dimension. Clear? Now, if that is not there, then there is no way we can enter into any meaningful or fruitful relationship with the world. Then the best thing to do is to incubate yourself. Go and hide. Okay? Go and hide. So, finally, we are sent into the world. If we have anything to do with Jesus at all, we have to be in a state of sentness. So that state of being sent into the world as partners in mission with Christ is completely contrary to this idea of living in separation from the world. Okay? I don't think it has to be explained any more than that. But in this, there is an issue. I'll merely flag that issue for want of time today. We'll take it up. We'll continue in the next session. Now, the issue here is whether we have faith or not. If we have no faith, then we cannot be sent out. We cannot go out. Because the absence of faith breeds fear. All kinds of imaginary fears. Now, very often, the fears that we entertain may not correspond to the reality. These fears are what we project because of our own inner state. We project these fears onto the world. And that is why people say that 99% of all your fears are baseless. But fear can so paralyze us that we beat ourselves to a corner, stay there, and always give the excuse that the world is so dark, so corrupt, so full of dangers, and we are not supposed to have anything to do with the world. Now, today I also wanted to share with you the distinction between faith and belief, but time doesn't permit. We'll do that in the next session. What we have is belief, not faith. And unless and until we have faith, we cannot relate to the world in a spiritual way. And what is the distinction, etc., we'll discuss. So now the time for discussion. I'm very glad to say that my friend George wrote a beautiful piece, which has a bearing on the theme we are developing now. He wrote that first in Malayalam, and the beauty of it really enchanted me. And I wanted him to read it out to us. And then he very kindly said that you translate that to English. I was wondering how he would do it because the original text is so beautiful and difficult to translate. I've been a translator myself, so I know what it means to translate. But he has done it. So I've suggested to him that he should first read the Malayalam version and then the English version, and then thereafter we'll take up your questions for discussion. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. Okay, George, would you please share with us your...
I'm sharing the screens. Ready?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'll just read the Malayalam.
Yes.
ഒരു നീർക്കണത്തിന്റെ ഓംകാരനാദം, കാലവർഷമഴ തൊടിയിൽ തടയിട്ടൊരുക്കിയ നുറുങ്ങു പെയ്കയിൽ പതനുരപ്പിക്കുന്നു അതിൽ പതിക്കുന്ന നീർത്തുള്ളികൾ. പ്രഭാതം ഉണരുന്നതേയുള്ളൂ. തുള്ളിക്കൊരുകുടം നീ ഓമലി, ഞാൻ മൃദുവായി മുരണ്ടു. മൃദുലമായൊരു പുഞ്ചിരി തൂകി നീർക്കുടം നവോഢയെ പോലെ ചിണുങ്ങി. എത്ര ഉയരത്തിൽ നിന്നാണ് നിൻ പതനം, ഉത്സാഹിയായ കാമുകനെ പോലെ ഞാൻ ആരാഞ്ഞു. നീലാകാശത്തിന്റെ അനന്തതയിലേക്ക് അവൾ വിരൽ ചൂണ്ടി. മിഴിച്ചിമ്മുന്ന നക്ഷത്രങ്ങൾ നീളെ നീളെ. ആ ഉയരത്തിൽ ഈശ്വരനെ തൃപ്തിയാവോളം നീ ദർശിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടാവും അല്ലേ? അവിടെയല്ലേ മുരാരിയുടെ ആസ്ഥാനം. ജിജ്ഞാസുവായി മാറി ഞാൻ. ഭഗവാനെ കാണാനാണ് ഞാൻ ഭൂമിയോളം താണിറങ്ങി വന്നത്. ഈ മണ്ണിലും പുല്ലിലും പൂവിലും സുമനസ്സുകളിലും. അവിടെയാണ് അദ്ദേഹം തൻ്റെ സൃഷ്ടികൾക്കൊപ്പം. അവൾ മന്ദഹസിച്ചു. ഒരു മേഘച്ചികളായി പറന്നു കയറാൻ, ഭഗവത് സന്നിധാനത്തിലേക്ക് കുതിച്ചുയരാൻ കൊതിച്ച ഞാൻ ഒരു നീർക്കണമായി ഭൂമിയെ പുൽകുവാൻ താഴേക്ക് വീണു.
Good. Thank you so much. Great. Now let's the English version
The
for the sake of
part of it. A breeze swept up. Cooler breeze swept me over, waking me up. Dawn wasn't yet. Must be a few steps behind.
your son.
Were lavish whole night. The thickly damp air filling my bedroom seemed
Your network is choking you. All right. We have lost George. You're back on. Okay. You can continue, please. Hello. No, you're muted. Please unmute yourself. Jump. Okay. Unmute
I'm
yourself.
muted. I'm muted.
Okay. Okay.
Let me open it. Yeah, okay. Monsoon rains were lavish whole night. The thickly damp air filling my bedroom seemed affirming. Small pits of water had formed several mini pools along the courtyard. Raindrops falling into it raised hemispheric bubbles, reflecting gorgeous colors of the twilight. What height in the skies were you, dear? I made friends with a lovely raindrop, busy bubble making upon falling into the pool beside. She just pointed to the celestial realms beyond my eye reach. I sighed, gazing up the dazzling mystic heights. Those heavenly levels, you must have been crossing the mighty creator every move around there, right? I let go a hush in amaze. She giggled and said, it was to meet him that I humbled down to the earth. God is there, here only, over the fields and meadows and flowers and the loving human hearts around here, she said, smiling. I felt it. All my desires to float in the clouds encircling my creator, far up in the cosmic horizon, condensed into an ordinary raindrop, and I dashed downwards my pretty habitat, laughing while falling and dancing while crashing.
Lovely. Good. So that is, it's a wonderful thing to be able to express oneself in this sort of organic, imaginative manner, capturing a bit of one's experience and immortalizing it through words. So thank you. Now we'll take up, well, my request to George is please continue writing and more and more. Let there be more and more from your pen. Huh? Good, wonderful. Okay, questions, please. First of all, if anything that I have said is not clear enough and further explanations are needed, please let me know. Any question?
Reverend Suresh.
Yes.
No, I fully agree whatever you are saying. You know, it was in any case, most of us give this same connotation to all the things which we give in the church, saying that, you know, you are of the world, you are in the world and not of the world. That is normally is the way we give that. But then the holiness which we are comparing is the holiness of God. It is absolute perfection where we cannot go. But in the struggle of being in the world, as you said, we will be going out. There is a temptation all the time to sin. So that is the purity which you are asking for, saying that you don't go and follow the methods of the world. Keep yourself separate from that, but at the same, you will be there in any case. Because I don't know what is the difference what you are speaking about. Separation is always, we are saying that, the sinful nature is always there. And the temptation is always there when you go to the world. When that, not an ascetic way, but you have to be careful that you live a continuous relationship with the Lord, as well as with the be holy as I am holy. That is the main motto.
Now, Suresh, are there no temptations within our community?
Yes.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yes.
See, all patterns that exist, and I don't say this in a derogatory manner, this is pure realism. Whatever patterns exist in the world outside exist also in our community. For example, how do we build our church? Is there any idea as to what kind of church building Jesus envisaged? No. Across the centuries, the style or the architectural style of building churches has changed in tune with the changes in the world. Right? The size, the shape, the material, the architectural design, everything has changed only in conformity to the world. Number one. Number two, Catholics have their basilica, right? The main church is called the basilica. Basilica is derived from the word basilios, which means the king. A king's residence, actually king's hall, where he sat and met people, is basilica. So the church was built imitating the basilica of the Roman emperor. You understand? So
church for us is the body of Christ. In any case, I don't know if you take it that way. Yes, the buildings are absolutely out of place.
Suresh, what happened?
When you say church is the body of Christ, that is you're all members. That's what we say.
Suresh, see, what happens is this. When it comes to defending anything, we use certain expressions from the Bible. But the lived reality is very different. Right, because see, for example, you will understand this very clearly if you look away from the Christian community and look at the Muslims. I've worked with the Muslim community for years and years. When anything which is absolutely wrong and rotten is questioned, you know what they say? Well, this is not part of Islam. Quran says this. And I will always ask them, then why is it that you don't live according to the Quran? Every Muslim will say that Quran does not, or Islam does not recommend or tolerate extremism or terrorism, right? But terrorism is practiced. So if you want to justify that situation, what you do is you'll say, well, Quran doesn't recommend violence. Well, that is also not completely true, but this is what is often said. So when you want to justify something, bring in Quran. When you want to do something else, then you bring something else like hadith or some teaching by some mullah, some fatwa. This kind of playing hide and seek happens all the time. In every religion it happens. And it's high time that in the interest of truth, we recognize this. That's why, Jesus denounced hypocrisy because he knew, because of his direct experience with Judaism, how it functioned. He knew that every religion functioned in terms of hypocrisy. That is, one face to show in public and another reality behind the curtain. This will not do. So therefore, we need to be consistent. When we say, for example, we can certainly say that we have nothing to do with the world, but then we should live like the desert fathers. who renounced the life of culture, derived no advantage from it, went deep into the desert, spent their time in meditation, in prayer, etc. I can understand that. But that's not that's not how Jesus lived. You see, for example, Jesus said that John came without eating and drinking, and people said that he had a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and they say he's a friend of the sinners, right? So either way, you're damned. Okay. So anyway, Jesus did not abide by the model of John the Baptist, even though he said that none born of a woman is greater than John the Baptist. Okay. The difference between John the Baptist and Jesus is that John the Baptist, in a way, adopted a very fierce ascetic life, which was distinguished in many ways by practical separation from the benefits of the world. But he was not again separated from the world because he had a mission to the king. And that's how he lost his head. Okay. So even there, the idea that you can be separated or from the world or indifferent to it does not exist. Okay. Jesus was different even from that model. He was more humane. He participated in the life of ordinary people. He accepted the ministrations of the so-called fallen people, etc., to the indignation of Simon the Pharisee, etc., chapter 7 of Luke's Gospel. So you find it completely different. You find Jesus completely different. So this idea of the plate having two sides, depending on the situation, we play one side of the gramophone record, and then on another occasion we turn the other side and play that side. That should stop. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Church is run entirely on money, my dear friend. It's not run on God's power. I don't know if you agree with me. I can only tell you what I have found. When you get time, read George Bernard Shaw's play, Major Barbara. It's a story of a person from Salvation Army. Her name is, that's why she's called Major Barbara. Barbara Undershaft. Her rank is Major. She's completely devoted, and she goes out in the soap salvation, soap salvation, etc. But her father, Andrew Undershaft, is an arms dealer. So there's a conversation between the father and the daughter. The father gets sick of all this sanctimonious things. He says, look, you can't run your soup chicken without my blood money. That's a harsh reality. Okay. And this is the harsh reality that K.P. Yohanan faced. You can preach what you want. End of the day, you have to have tons of money. So he accumulated 20,000 acres of land in Kerala alone. Is it a good thing, bad thing, wrong? Decide. So if you think that God's work, so-called God's work, is being done with godly resources, I'm afraid my experience over the last half a century makes me believe otherwise. There's a lot of pretense, but the truth is very different. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, the face of truth is ugly. That is why people shun it.
Yeah. No, in this case, Alex, it's not even truth. What we're saying is, you see, this theology, this pseudo-theology of separation from the world to the extent of denying the world, is offered as a convenient excuse for abdicating or giving up all responsibilities which are spiritual. So what do? For example, in Kerala, we have this Unarva meetings, that sort of revival meetings, right? Unarva. You get into a room, you work up a lot of emotional frenzy, you clap your hands, the rhythmic song, the people speak in tongues, and this and the other. That session ends, curtain falls, finished. Nothing happens, right? Now that gives some kind of emotional relief. It can be accomplished in complete indifference to the world. In fact, awareness of the world spoils the show. Because if you actually put this spectacle side by side with the realities of the world, this looks absolutely ridiculous. It looks ugly. And you were not there. when I was doing the last course with which some of the present members also attended, I quoted from a German author who described this as what is that? Wild gymnastics of ghastly ugliness. You know, this charismatic sessions, that's how he describes this. Wild gymnastics, gymnastics is vigorous bodily movements, right? Wild gymnastics of ghastly ugliness. That's how the world sees it. Okay, you can, within your own group, you can always say, oh, we had a fantastic spiritual session, people spoke in tongues, we had a great time. You can say all that. But Jesus would say, a tree is known by its fruits. What's the fruit you're producing? Okay. You can go on having your spiritual sessions for 50 years and stay where you are.
Yes, sir, that's right. That's right. What you see is very often gyrations.
Gyrations, yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. Good, thank you. Any other question? Now, I am particularly sensitive to this issue for a reason. The reason is, I believe that as Christians, we are diminishing in stature. We are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. We are becoming irrelevant to the world. It's even if the entire Christian community disappears from the soil of Kerala tomorrow, not many people are likely to miss us. What is our relevance? Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, the light of the world, etc. So what is our present plight? That's the issue. Okay. So it's only through our relationship or our involvement in the world that our own spiritual mettle is put to the test. Okay. Now, just imagine that Jesus, the Son of God, had to undergo the temptations. Now we say, well, the world is full of temptations, as my good friend Suresh said. Yes, he's absolutely right. So what did Jesus do? He shunned those temptations, or he faced them up front? Unless you face temptations, how do you know where you stand? Okay. And there's a lovely story by the American author Mark Twain. It's called The Man Who Tempted Hadleyburg. The Man Who Tempted Hadleyburg. The people of Hadleyburg were very self-righteous. They were very confident about their spiritual strength. They said, nobody can make us fall, etc., etc. Then somebody comes along and he sweeps them off their feet and exposes their brittleness. So the motto of the town council before this happened was, lead us not into temptation. So finally, they all agreed to change that motto and they correct it in this manner, lead us into temptation, right? Because that's the only way you know how weak or strong you are, okay? Character, by the way, is very practically defined as the quality of being tested and proved, okay? And all that will take place only in the world out there. Any further question?
Father, I totally agree with your statements given to us today.
Okay.
But I find it very difficult to be in the world with real Christian values. I'm a Catholic, but from my childhood onwards, I am seeing all the hypocrisies in the institutional church. Then I will talk to my bishops, priests, and everybody that, see, I find it very difficult to stand with the institutional church.
There are two things that you've said, George. First, you said that it's very difficult to go out into the world with Christian values. The second thing that you said, which very few people would say, is that it's equally difficult, perhaps even more difficult, to be in the Christian world with Christian values.
Yeah.
You'll get into serious trouble. I got into serious trouble. My experience is that it is easier to be a Christian in the world outside than in the church world. It's my experience. It may not be your experience. I have to tell you that this is my experience, right? So what are we to do? neither in the world nor in the church. So the difference between the church and the world disappears altogether when you try to live by Christian values. I hope one day you read my memoir titled On a Stormy Course, which deals with my 9 years of experience in St. Stephen's College. After all, you have a love for the college, right? Please order a copy of that book from Amazon and read it. How did I get into near-death experiences as principal of the college? Simply because I wanted to see if social justice, as envisaged by Jesus, he said he came to preach the good news to the poor, if that can be practiced through higher education. I wanted to see, for example, if a Christian college can be run without corruption. When I refused to sell seats for money, the moderator of the Church of North India, who was my classmate in theology, Bishop's College, Calcutta, his name is Philip Marandi, he came to me and said, he was very angry. He said, how do you expect the church to run if we can't make money out of our institutions? He was very angry with me. Okay? So, when it comes to brass tacks, the difference between the world and the church disappears altogether. Now, look at the Jerusalem church, the Jerusalem temple. When Solomon built it, there was no marketplace. And when the church was ready and he was dedicating it, he makes a speech. And in his prayer, he says, God, who is man that he may build a dwelling place for you? I know that you don't live in man-made houses, right? And yet, out of respect for you, as a token of the acknowledgement that you are in our midst. That was how it was. Now come to the time of Jesus Christ. The most important thing about Jerusalem church is not its sanctuary, but the market on the premises, because that's where money is made. And the Jewish authorities decided to kill Jesus, not because he preached inside the temple, but because he cleansed the market. He touched their economic interests. So this is nothing new. It's been like this. In every religion, not just in Christianity, you touch the economic interest of the priestly class, then you see for yourself.
I have a suggestion. See, you are explaining all the theoretical part to be a true Christian, to find the kingdom of world, kingdom of God. But see, I find myself is coming to the fag end of my life. Till now, I have not practiced. I'm not a practicing Christian so far. So, in your class, can you slowly guide me to practice some teachings of Jesus Christ in the practical way?
Yeah. Well, why don't you, to begin with, read one of my latest books. It's called Thoughts for Trying Times, where I explain some of, about 22 chapters, some of the teachings of Jesus Christ are explained there. Then we can enter into a personal dialogue, because your needs may not be the same as the needs of others. I'm willing to discuss matters on phone with you to any extent. But if you have time, you come over to Trivandrum, stay here a weekend, we can just go on discussing things, no problem. Not that I am an ustad in any of these things, but together we can seek and encourage each other. That much we can do. So my house is always open for anybody who wants to, think and seek together. Okay? Feel free
Thank
to.
you, Father. Thank you, Father.
Anything else? Anything that is not particularly clear, because I'm not very sure if I've made myself understood. There is a chat. Let me see. Can we have the poems? Baboy George says, George Tharagan, he wants a copy of what you have written, so please send it to him. Or if you can mail the text to me, I think I have the text, right? Then I'll forward it to him.
Pleasure.
Okay. Or
Thank you.
you
Put it in the
have.
group.
Yeah, you can put it in the group. Okay, please do that. Just in case.
Okay, with pleasure. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've not heard ladies speak today.
Shall I add something
Yes.
more?
Yes, yes.
It's often said the world is too much with us, but now the state of affairs is that the church is too much with us.
I mean, as I told last time also, as I said last time also, you see, as Pastor Suresh said, if church is truly the body of Christ, and I've elaborately discussed this in my book, what it means. See, the problem with us is that many of these expressions are used by us without knowing what they mean. So if the church is really in spirit and in truth the body of Christ, it's a tremendous blessing. There's nothing that's comparable to it. So we have a duty as Christians to make sure that the church is what it pretends to be. So abolishing the gulf between claim and reality must now be deemed a Christian responsibility. You remember in his conversation with the woman of Samaria, Jesus said, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Why did he say that? He said that in connection with worship. What he's trying to do is to alert us to the fact that when it comes to worship, we are neither in spirit nor in truth. We think we are worshiping. We may not be worshiping at all. So Jesus says, the Samaritans say that God is on this mountain. Jews say that it is on this mountain. And that woman herself says, Jesus says, a time is coming when people will know that God is neither on this mountain nor on that mountain, which means that for centuries, people have been worshiping in a spirit of untruth. Do you really believe that this denominational zeal that powers many a Christian is compatible with being a Christian at all? Can we be Christians and denominational zealots at the same time? It's impossible. So, our experience of worship may have nothing to do with worship at all. So if you really attach any significance to the idea that church is indeed the body of Christ, you have to, all of us have to, begin to address some of these very glaring issues. But then for us to say that, no, that is not my concern at all. I just go there and I come back. I don't want to have anything to do with anything else. I don't want to soil my hand. That is what doesn't make sense to me. I'm not inciting anybody to create rupture or ruckus. No. I'm only saying that we should insist on standing on truth, because that's the teaching. Worship must be offered in spirit and in truth. Anything short of that is not worship. So how can church be the body of Christ when the worship that's going on inside the church is not worship in spirit and in truth? That's a fundamental issue. So it so happens, therefore, that consciously that we are separated from the world, and unconsciously we are also separated from the true church. Which actually means that we have a pseudo relationship with both. As I said, not relating to the world is also a form of relating. Likewise, worshipping is also a form of not worshipping. Okay? And it's time to wake up to some of these conundrums and these contradictions. That's the point.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Alex, what is your background? You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yes, my background is to begin with. I began my career in the pharmaceutical field.
Very nice.
And then I resigned as a regional manager of a pharmaceutical company. All the time I have been traveling. I have a touring person in the market. Good. And actually, I was not cut out for a career in sales, but circumstances forced me to take up that. That's all.
Okay. But
and,
when I
interested in academics.
That is it. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes,
I get the impression that your mind is well nourished. You've read a lot. You've read a lot.
That's
Am I
why,
right?
yes, humbly. See, I have started a training firm of my own, and I named it Mind Transformation of the Mind.
Very good.
That is,
Excellent.
unless the training helps you to transform yourself, there
Hmm.
is no meaning in training anybody. There is
Yes.
no meaning in telling gospel to anybody if he is not saved.
Yes.
So that, likewise.
Hmm.
So that's why even my email ID is Mind Trans.
Yeah. Now it
Probably you would have
makes
noted.
sense. Makes
Noted,
sense.
noted. Yes.
Yes.
Now I am going through your book. Definitely, I will get back to you.
Yeah, you got.
Something I am not in a position to read too much of it because my eyes get blurred or something like. I think I will have to go for a
Yeah.
cataract surgery or something like.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, I will get back to you on points which I feel that I should get.
We can discuss anything that you
Okay, I am. Thank you very much, sir, for sending the
Welcome.
books to me.
Okay.
Read through my phone.
Yeah. I have now 4 or 5 copies left. If anyone wants free copies, the only condition is that it has to be collected from my house. I'm not in a position to send it to anybody. Its book is free, but it needs to be collected. Okay, now it seems there are no further questions. So I thank all of you for.
Just a small.
Yes, Doctor.
I have been carrying the feeling that this kind of separationism that they highly call, it's a kind of glorious escapism.
It is that, but you see, there is another aspect to this, which is
God has brought us straight into this world, put us in the center of the garden to tend it, to nurture it, to enrich it. And we are going away from it to the celestial heights.
Yeah. Now, George, if you look at it,
wonderful one.
If you look at it historically, you find that this teaching of separation came to the fore only after the 18th century. This will be interesting for you to pursue further. Now, why did it come up? It came up because in the 18th century, the European worldview was that the whole world was a perfect machine. Everything worked like clockwork. So this was actually called the universal clock. Okay. Now, what happens is, suppose you make a clock. What happens? You take certain parts, you fit them together, and a clock comes into being. But all the time, you are acting outside of the clock. No clock is made from within. You look at nature, you're a nature lover, I can see from what you have written. How does a tree grow in nature? Does somebody operate from outside and squeeze it and shake it and make it grow? A tree grows from within outwards, right? Whereas anything mechanical has to be put together from the outside. The tree, all of nature is from inside towards the out. Whatever man makes is exactly the opposite, from outwards to the inside. Okay, so because the universe was understood as a perfect piece of machine, a clockwork, the idea of God creating the world itself was understood in that manner. So God takes, clay and makes Adam, and out of Adam's rib, Eve is fashioned, etc. God speaks the heaven and earth into existence. God says that there be plants, that there be birds, that there be animals, etc. So the impression that we get is that God stands outside and creates the world. So from there, you can easily get the impression that God is an outsider to creation. Okay? But the interesting thing is that never before the 18th century Western theologians thought of God as an outsider to creation. For example, if you look at historiography, that is art of writing history, God was imagined by every history writer as the presiding, shaping, determining force in history. History unfolded according to the will of God. But from the 18th century onwards, that's not how history is understood. God is expelled from history. As Eric Fromm wrote in one of his books, he says from 18th century onwards, we see this expulsion of God. For example, he says historians expel God from history. Karl Marx expelled God from economics. Charles Darwin expelled God from nature. Freud expelled God from human mind and installed sex in place of God. So you find the same pattern everywhere. God exits, God must go out. And human beings must claim the whole world for themselves. So it was a product of this kind of cultural reorientation that created this pseudo-theology of separation from the world. Because after all, God is alien to the world, then why should we be? Why should we have anything to the world? Because if God is alien to the world, God is a clockwork which functions according to its own rules and principles, and God has nothing to do with it. God is a stranger, an absentee landlord, if you like. Then what are we to do as Christians? We too must be separated from the. This is how it happened, actually. Historically, this is how it happened. So it is not a notion derived from the Bible, though biblical texts are used by, for example, the Brethren Church, used in order to justify this kind of idea. But historically, I know, because I'm also a historian of ideas, this is how it happened. So basically, it's a triumph of culture over the Bible, not the other way around. People think that they're being extremely pious when they embrace this view. Basically, they are surrendering themselves to European culture. Eastern culture is very different. In Eastern culture, this idea that God is a kind of mechanic who created something from outside and departed doesn't exist at all. The Eastern idea is, of course, something that will again provoke a lot of controversy. The idea that God is part of creation. God is creation. Creation is God. You can't separate the creator from creation. That's the Eastern view. That's why the Eastern idea of salvation, moksha, is that of human beings ultimately merging into Brahma. And plurality ceases to exist and everything becomes one. Okay? So this idea that we are separated from the world, separated from everything else, that doesn't exist in Eastern philosophy, Eastern spiritual thing. And nor does it exist in Jesus's worldview, Jesus's teaching, Jesus's way of doing mission, Jesus's understanding of relationship between him and his Father and God's involvement with the world. I don't know from where it came. The only explanation I can give is that it came from European culture because of the dominance of science and technology, by which the world began to be seen as a piece of machine which functioned according to set rules, not according to the will of God. This is what is called scientific determinism. Scientific determinism, as against, of course, the idea of predetermination, which was understood as another form of determination, but that's a complicated area. I don't want to go into it. Anyway, on that, I'll close for the time being. But you see, the idea is this. Please continue your own research, your reading, your reflection along these lines. Work out these ideas as clear and palatable to yourself, as relevant to yourself. The fact that you hear it from someone is not enough at all, because you'll never understand, because I've gone through all this. I may have heard one idea 1,000 times or 100 times from somebody, never understood it until I began to follow it up myself, work on it, write it out, apply it, learn, by doing things. That's the only way you can understand spiritual concepts. Simply by hearing, you don't understand anything. I have not been able to understand simply by listening. But we also need to listen for the reason that listening could actually provoke or stimulate certain interests in us, which then we follow up and then we reach significant destinations. That's how it happens. Okay.
So I have a question.
Very good. I like questions.
So there's this one teaching that Jesus gives when he sends out his disciples, saying, I send you out as sheep among wolves.
Yes.
Who are the wolves?
Yeah. Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. Okay. Now the thing is this. Now the question really is not who are the wolves. Jesus is actually referring to two different orientations. Now, the world and you. Okay. Now, as far as the world is concerned, it has acquired a certain character, which is not the original character. For example, through the doctrine of the original sin, we accept the fact that creation has suffered a certain denaturing or deformation. Okay. So nothing is as it was. Everything is twisted and warped. But that doesn't mean that God despises it. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't say, hate sin, but love the sinner. So there's no way to walk out on it. You have to still stay engaged with it. So why does the need to send his disciples out to the world arise at all? Behold, I sent you like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as innocent as the dove, but as subtle as the serpent. So clearly, there is a difference. Clearly, there is a need to recognize how the sector in which you're going to operate works. Ignorance is not an advantage. Naivete or simplicity or gullibility is not your advantage. Okay? You have to understand where you are located. Now, that's why, again, remember I quoted from Kierkegaard and I said, your understanding of the world should not become an understanding with the world. So the fact that you're going into the world which has the nature of the wolf, what is the nature of the wolf? It relates to everything unilaterally. Okay? Wolf is not just somebody who bites. The basic pattern here is not biting or killing. The basic pattern here is relating to everything unilaterally. That is, relating to everything and everyone in terms of my interest alone. You remember when Jesus called Simon and his brother Andrew, you find it in the first chapter of Mark's Gospel, he said, behold, I will make you fishers of men. What's the difference? Fishers of fish act unilaterally. No one catches fish for the interest or for the sake of the fish. You catch fish only for your own gain, interest, benefit, right? You cannot do that with human beings. The first thing we have to do when we relate to human beings is to renounce unilateralism and accept the discipline of reciprocity or mutuality. That's what Jesus says, do unto others what you would that they should do to you. Treat others as you want to be treated. That's called mutuality. Okay? With what judgment you judge, it will be measured to you. Okay? So that, now the world doesn't operate in that fashion. The world always operates unilaterally. You know, for example, I have earned a large number of enemies by counseling them. People come to me for counseling. Oh, Father, you know, we want to consult you on this, that I have this problem, that problem, you know, this. And whenever I have given any sincere advice, truthful advice, it certainly varied from their expectations and they all got very upset. So when people come to you for counseling, they come expecting that you would tell them exactly what they want to hear. So what pretends to be a reciprocal situation is a purely unilateral situation. You understand? So that's how the world operates. Now, for example, most people relate to the workplace unilaterally. That is my own interest, nothing else. That's how we relate to churches also. I've asked many people, why do you go to church? They say baptism, wedding, burial. Unilateral or reciprocal? Tell me. Now, husband-wife relationship, unilateral or reciprocal? Often, 9 out of 10, arrangement of convenience. Relationships are large continents of hypocrisy and play acting. Why? Because we are not willing to accept the discipline of reciprocity. As a result, individuals use each other and we call it a relationship. Okay, so look at it in any which way you want. For example, international relations. Now, it is a dictum in international relations that every country is duty bound to pursue its own interests. That is to say, we must relate to the global community unilaterally. Okay, now India, for example, has adopted this posture of non-alignment in relation to the Ukraine crisis. Is it because we want to be non-aligned? No, it's because it's costly to provoke Russia. Right? So it is unilateralism. You take any aspect in which the world operates, it is. Now, a politician comes to you at the time of elections with folded hands, promising to serve you till the end of his, to the last breath of his life. But after elections, you will try hard to locate him anywhere, you won't find him. Okay? Because politics is purely unilateral. So any aspect of life. Now, Jesus is saying, look, this is the character of the world that you're going to relate to. So sending out is a form of relating, isn't it? Or is it escapism? The fact that the world is of this nature is not a valid excuse for you're not going. That's what he's saying. You have to go. And it's very convenient and comfortable to be separated. You say, well, you know, I'm separate, I'm called apart. I have nothing to do with the world. Why should I go anywhere? Very comfortable, no? Very nice. But the end product is a life of futility, utter futility. It is indistinguishable from living death. Okay? All right. Now, assuming that there are no further questions, and with the further request that you continue to reflect on what I have discussed with you in a very jerky, snatchy fashion. You know, there's much, much more to be said and discovered about everything that I've said today, because each of the points I've raised would lend itself to detailed analysis and it will take a long, long, long time. It's possible to write an entire book on this one question of how to relate to the world. So it's that critical and expansive an issue. So please pursue with this. As I said, we'll devote one more session to it, and then hopefully things will become clearer. Okay. So thank you very much, and until we meet again, may all that's good and beautiful come your way. Bye.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.